Hey there, beautiful soul. Welcome back to Noah Stories, where quiet hearts echo the loudest. Today's tale is about loneliness, love, and the unexpected moments that change our lives forever. Have you ever met someone who didn't just walk into your life, but gently rebuilt it from the inside out? Tonight, we meet a man who had everything, except the one thing that matters most. Let's begin. Have you ever met someone who changed your entire life in a single evening? Lucas Grant hadn't. In fact, he no longer believed that people or moments had that kind of power anymore. Not after what he'd been through. Not after 7 years of waking up in silence, of dining at long tables set for one, of coming home to a penthouse filled with everything except warmth. They called him a visionary, a millionaire genius who had reimagined modern architecture. But titles were cold comfort when memories kept the lights on longer than they should. It was New Year's Eve, and the city of San Francisco sparkled with hope. The Bay Bridge shimmered in gold under a cloudy sky. Fireworks whispered promises of change in the distance, and restaurants bustled with couples clinking glasses and leaning into each other's laughter. Inside one of those places, an elegant rooftop restaurant tucked above a quiet street, Lucas adjusted his cufflinks without really looking at his reflection in the window. The glass only reminded him of the years that had passed and the man he used to be. He had almost counseled, twice. His assistant, Theo, had practically begged him not to. Just one evening, Lucas, he'd said, placing the dinner reservation envelope on his desk, like it was some kind of lifeline. Go, you need this, you need someone. Lucas didn't think he did. He had spent years convincing himself that solitude was his strength, that needing people, opening up to them, was a risk best left in the past. But something about the look in Theo's eyes, a quiet kind of hopefulness, had moved something in him. So he said yes. He regretted it as soon as he walked through the restaurant doors. Everything felt too polished, too intimate. Tables lit with low candlelight, couples holding hands, the faint sound of jazz floating through the air. The mortar D led him to a table near the glass wall overlooking the bay, where the city lights painted gentle gold lines on the surface of the water. He sat, loosened his collars slightly, and took a slow breath. The waiter poured him a glass of wine. He hadn't touched it. He was about to stand and leave when the elevator door opened. She stepped out, graceful and unhurried, like she wasn't late at all but right on time, her own time. Her name was Claire Emerson. Lucas didn't know it yet, but she was about to become the chapter his story had been waiting for. She wore a forest green dress that seemed to catch the warm tones of the candlelight. Her hair swept back in a way that revealed the calm strength in her face. She walked like someone who had known sorrow and made peace with it, like someone who had learned how to find beauty again. Her eyes scanned the room until they landed on him, and when they did, she smiled. Not a flirtatious smile, not polite, but honest one that said, "I see you." In a way Lucas hadn't felt in years. He stood awkwardly, nearly knocking over his wineglass. She reached the table and extended her hand. "Lucas Grant?" she asked, her voice gentle and clear. "Yes," he said, his own voice rougher than he intended. "Hi, I'm Claire," she replied. "It's lovely to meet you." They sat, and for a moment, there was only the quiet clink of plates from nearby tables and the soft jazz playing in the background. Lucas reached for the wine, took a small sip, and tried to think of anything to say. He had once spoken to rooms of investors without a single stutter, but now, seated across from someone who looked at him like he wasn't just another headline or success story, the words felt heavier. "I have to admit," he said finally, "I wasn't sure I'd come tonight." Claire smiled again, and this time it reached her eyes. "Me neither." "Blind dates," he added with a soft chuckle. "Not exactly my usual scene." "Well, to be fair," Claire said, "my usual scene lately has been a book and a blanket." They both laughed, and the sound of it was a relief. A small crack in the wall Lucas had built around himself. The kind of laugh that doesn't fix everything, but reminds you that something inside is still alive. As the waiter arrived to take their order, Lucas studied her quietly. She wasn't wearing much makeup. Her nails weren't done. She didn't speak like she was trying to impress him. She simply was present, real, and unhurried. And it was that quiet confidence that unsettled him in the best way. Over appetizers, they spoke about travel. Over dinner, about childhood. She told him about growing up near the Oregon coast, about how her father used to build boats in the backyard, and how her mother kept a garden so wild it seemed to belong in a fairy tale. He listened more than he spoke. Something about her voice made listening feel like an act of healing. When it was his turn, he hesitated. He never shared much. He never needed to. But tonight felt different, like the night itself was holding its breath, urging him to let go. So he told her about his mother, how she used to hum while cooking, about how his younger brother, Daniel, had died in a car accident 7 years ago, about the silence that came after. She didn't interrupt. She didn't pity him. She simply reached out and placed her hand gently over his for a moment, a quiet gesture. But Lucas felt it all the way through him. By the time desert came, the world outside had changed. The fog had lifted slightly, revealing stars above the city, and for the first time in years, Lucas felt like he could breathe a little easier. The clock approached midnight. Fireworks began to spark in the distance, reflections bursting across the bay, like stories being written in the sky. Claire leaned forward slightly, her eyes locked on his. "I'm glad you came tonight," she said. He could have said the same. He could have thanked her. But instead, he said the truest thing he'd said in years. "So am I." As the countdown echoed through the restaurant and glasses clinked all around them, Lucas wasn't thinking about resolutions or new beginnings. He was thinking about how one evening, one quiet voice, one shared milk could be the start of something he never dared to hope for again. And just like that, for the first time in a very long time, Lucas Grant didn't feel alone. Some moments stay with you longer than they have any right to. They linger not because of grand gestures or fireworks, but because something shifts in you so quietly, so gently, that you don't even realize you're being changed. That's what the night had done to Lucas, and as the early hours of the new year crept in, he found himself replaying every second of it. He hadn't expected her to text yet. The next morning there it was, a simple message from Claire. "Last night was peaceful. Thank you for showing up." Lucas stared at the message far longer than it took to read it. He almost didn't respond, not because he didn't want to, but because he was afraid to say too much or too little. Words had become difficult for him when they weren't part of blueprints or contracts. But eventually, he replied, "Thank you for making it easy to be there." It was a soft beginning. But soft things, Lucas would soon learn, are often the strongest. Over the next few weeks, their connection unfolded like a quiet sunrise. No rush, no scripts, just two people learning how to be seen again. They started meeting for coffee on weekends, then long walks through Golden Gate Park, where Claire would stop to admire wildflowers with childlike wonder, while Lucas watched her, wondering how someone could move through the world so openly. He learned that she worked in art therapy, helping children express trauma through color and clay. She told him about a little girl who had once molded a sculpture of a broken house only to paint the cracks in gold. "I think broken things deserve beauty," Claire had said that day, and Lucas had looked away quickly, afraid she'd see too much in his eyes. He found himself wanting to be around her more than made sense. She didn't ask about his net worth. She didn't care about the cars he didn't drive, or the luxury apartment he barely lived in. She never brought up the headlines or the awards. She just saw him, and it terrified him, because for the first time in years, someone was touching the part of him he had buried beneath 7 years of silence. One rainy afternoon in February, they were sitting in a tiny bookstore cafe tucked into an alley, the kind of place only locals knew. Claire had a worn copy of The Little Prince in her lap, her thumb tracing the corner of the page like she'd done it 1,000 times. Lucas was sipping coffee, distracted by the sound of her laughter as she read him her favorite lines. Then she paused, looked at him, and said something that unsettled him more than he expected. "You build homes for people," she said gently, "but where do you go when you need shelter?" Lucas froze. The question hit deeper than she probably realized. He had never thought about it in that way. He'd designed towers that kissed the sky, retreats buried in the hills, retreats for clients with lives far more chaotic than his. But where did he go? His silence made her frown slightly, and she reached across the table, placing her hand over his, warm, steady. "You don't have to answer now," she said, "but I hope one day you let someone build with you." That night, Lucas stood in his apartment with the city stretched out below him, and for the first time, it felt empty, not lonely, but unshared. There's a difference. Loneliness is the absence of people. Emptiness is the absence of meaning. He found himself wondering what it would feel like to invite her in, not into his home, but into the parts of his heart that still had the under construction signs up. A few days later, they met again, this time for dinner at a quiet Italian place she loved. He arrived early, nerves twisting in his stomach, and waited outside in the cold. When she showed up, cheeks flushed from the wind, she smiled at him like they'd known each other in another lifetime. "Hi," she said simply, and it melted everything tight inside him. During dinner, he asked her, "Why did you say yes to that blind date?" Claire looked at him over the rim of her wine glass, thoughtful. "Because sometimes you have to open a door even if you don't know what's on the other side. I figured the worst thing that could happen was a boring evening, but I got you instead." He laughed, shaking his head. "I'm not sure that's much better." She smiled. "It is to me." The words stayed with him long after dinner ended, and as he walked her to her car, he stopped beside her door, hands buried in his coat pockets. "I haven't felt like this in a long time," he admitted quietly, eyes on the pavement. Claire tilted her head. "Like what?" "Like maybe there's still a future I didn't plan for, one that could be better than the one I lost." The air between them filled with something tender and sharp. Claire didn't say anything. Instead, she stepped closer, brushed his hand lightly with hers, and whispered, "Then let's not rush it. Let's just keep walking." They didn't kiss that night, and that made it more real somehow. Lucas stood watching her taillights disappear into the dark and realized something was changing inside him. He wasn't just falling for her. He was beginning to believe that maybe, just maybe, he deserved something more than survival. What Lucas didn't know was that Claire had her own shadows. The next chapter of their story wouldn't just test the walls he'd built, it would test what they were made of. But for now, in the quiet before the storm, he allowed himself to believe in possibility. He didn't know it yet, but the hardest part of healing isn't letting someone in, it's believing they'll stay. Asterisk. Some people come into your life like a whisper, but they stay like a storm. Lucas didn't realize how deep he'd let Claire into his heart until the night she didn't answer. It had been a normal Thursday. Nothing special, nothing strange. They'd texted in the morning. She'd sent him a photo of a crooked ceramic vase one of her students made lopsided, fragile, painted in wild oranges and blues. "Beautiful mess," she had captioned it. He had replied, "Like life," and she had sent a laughing emoji and a heart. That was the last thing he heard from her. Hours passed, then a full day, then two. He tried not to panic, tried to remind himself she was an independent woman with a life and schedule of her own. But as day 3 arrived with no word, no text, no call, he felt the old familiar weight in his chest. Abandonment had a way of knocking on doors you thought you'd sealed by the 4th day. Lucas drove to the art center she worked at. The receptionist recognized him instantly. "Oh, Mr. Grant, Claire mentioned you." He felt his shoulders ease slightly. "Is she in today?" The woman's face changed just enough for him to notice. "She called in sick earlier this week, said she needed some time off." Sounded off, honestly, but she didn't say more. Lucas left his number, thanked her, and walked back to his car feeling like he'd lost something he hadn't even gotten to hold yet. That night, he sat in his apartment, staring at the phone like it might ring if he just wished hard enough. The city below him buzzed as always, oblivious to the quiet war inside him. He didn't want to assume anything, didn't want to think the worst. But silence, to someone who's lived inside it, is not just absence. It's a trigger, a weight, a wound reopened. He wanted to believe she hadn't just walked away. But belief doesn't come easy when you've spent years learning not to need anyone. Finally, on the 6th day, a message arrived. Short, unsteady. "I'm sorry I disappeared. I'm okay, just needed space. I'll explain soon." Lucas stared at the words. They were a relief and a heartbreak, because they reminded him she had her own walls too. When they finally met again, it was at a bench near the bay, where sea wind carried the smell of salt and old wood, and the waves rolled in like long-forgotten confessions. Claire sat wrapped in a soft coat, her face pale, eyes tired, but she smiled when she saw him. He didn't press her. He just sat beside her, letting the silence settle between them like a blanket. After a long moment, she spoke. "Sometimes, when things start to feel too good, I pull away." He turned to her, but said nothing. "I've done it my whole life," she continued. "Every time someone gets close, I feel like I need to leave before they do, before they realize I'm too much, or too broken, or not enough." Lucas looked down at his hands, the scars invisible but still there. "What happened, Claire?" She hesitated, then said, "My ex-husband used to tell me I was a burden, that I needed too much, that I drained people." Lucas flinched inwardly. It explained so much, the way she sometimes hesitated before asking for anything, the way she smiled through discomfort, the way she checked his mood like someone used to waiting for things to shift suddenly. "I stayed with him for 5 years, she said, "because I believed him. And when I finally left, I promised myself I'd never let anyone see me like that again. Weak, needy, messy." Lucas reached for her hand. "You weren't weak. You were surviving." She looked at him, eyes glistening. "You're not a burden, Claire," he said quietly. "Not to me. Not ever." She broke then, not loudly, not dramatically, but in the softest way, her shoulders trembling as tears rolled silently down her cheeks, and Lucas didn't try to fix it. He just held her hand tighter and let her break safely beside him. Later that evening, as the sun dipped below the water and turned everything gold, she leaned her head on his shoulder. "I wanted to run," she whispered, "but when I thought about never seeing you again, it hurt more." Lucas closed his eyes, let the words settle. "I don't know how to do this," she said. "I don't know how to be loved and not lose myself." He turned to her, his voice low. "Then we learned together." She looked at him like maybe, just maybe, that was a promise worth believing. That night wasn't a turning point in the usual sense. No declarations, no grand kisses, just two people sitting in their bruises, choosing quietly not to run. And that was the bravest thing either of them had done in years. For the first time in a long while, Lucas wasn't afraid of falling. Asterisk sometimes, love doesn't knock. It waits quietly, on the edges of your most broken days, until you're finally ready to open the door. Lucas had never been in a relationship that didn't feel like a transaction. His past was filled with women who admired his success, his wealth, his calculated calm. But Claire was different. She didn't care how much money he had. She cared about why he couldn't sleep some nights. She wanted to know what he dreamed about when he let his guard down. And the more she asked, the more he realized he wasn't used to being seen like this. She asked once, "What would you build if you were never afraid of failing?" The question caught him off guard. He didn't answer right away. It lingered for days. When he finally did reply, it wasn't with words, it was with blueprints. He spent an entire weekend sketching something he hadn't drawn since college, a quiet retreat by the sea. 1 bedroom, walls of glass, wooden beams that stretched toward the horizon. A home not for impressing, but for belonging. He brought the sketch to Claire one Sunday morning, rolled up like a secret. They sat on her porch with coffee, the sunrise turning everything pink and soft. She unrolled it slowly, her fingers tracing the lines. Her eyes lit up. "It's beautiful. It's not for a client," he said. "It's not even practical, but it's the first thing I've designed that feels like home." Claire smiled without speaking, and that morning, something unspoken passed between them. An agreement, not written, not sealed, but deeply understood. But real love isn't built only on shared dreams. It's tested by fear. And sometimes, the fear comes not from the outside but from who we were before we met each other. It started subtly. Lucas had a meeting in New York, his first big pitch in months, and he didn't invite Claire to come. She didn't say anything, but something in her went still. When he returned, exhausted but victorious, she was happy for him, truly, but something felt off. Her smile didn't reach all the way to her eyes. "You didn't even tell me you landed the deal," she said, not accusing, just observing. "I didn't want to bore you with business stuff," he said, casually, brushing it off. But Claire wasn't someone who brushed off easily. "Lucas, I want to know your life." Even the boring parts. He didn't respond right away. The truth was, part of him still operated like he was alone, like everything had to be protected, like letting someone in would somehow weaken the structure, and Claire saw that. She saw the old habit of retreating, the way he didn't always remember. He wasn't surviving anymore. She reached for his hand. "We're not two people orbiting each other. We're building something, remember?" Lucas nodded, but shame crept in. How could he be this far in and still not know how to share all of himself? But Claire didn't pull away. She stayed. She kept showing up, even on the days when he didn't know how to say what he was feeling. And then came her turn to fall apart. It was a Tuesday in April when Claire's mother collapsed. Stroke. Sudden. No warning. Lucas was at work when the call came. He dropped everything. He didn't ask. He just went. Because this time, he wasn't falling alone. Sometimes, love doesn't knock. It waits quietly, on the edges of your most broken days, until you're finally ready to open the door. Lucas had never been in a relationship that didn't feel like a transaction. His past was filled with women who admired his success, his wealth, his calculated calm. But Claire was different. She didn't care how much money he had. She cared about why he couldn't sleep some nights. She wanted to know what he dreamed about when he let his guard down. And the more she asked, the more he realized he wasn't used to being seen like this. She asked once, "What would you build if you were never afraid of failing?" The question caught him off guard. He didn't answer right away. It lingered. For days, when he finally did reply, it wasn't with words, it was with blueprints. He spent an entire weekend sketching something he hadn't drawn since college, a quiet retreat by the sea. One bedroom, walls of glass, wooden beams that stretched toward the horizon. A home not for impressing, but for belonging. He brought the sketch to Claire one Sunday morning, rolled up like a secret. They sat on her porch with coffee. The sunrise, turning everything pink and soft. She unrolled it slowly, her fingers tracing the lines. Her eyes lit up. "It's beautiful. It's not for a client," he said. "It's not even practical, but it's the first thing I've designed that feels like home." Claire smiled without speaking. And that morning, something unspoken passed between them. An agreement not written, not sealed, but deeply understood. But real love isn't built only on shared dreams. It's tested by fear. And sometimes, the fear comes not from the outside but from who we were before we met each other. It started subtly. Lucas had a meeting in New York, his first big pitch in months, and he didn't invite Claire to come. She didn't say anything, but something in her went still. When he returned, exhausted but victorious, she was happy for him, truly, but something felt off. Her smile didn't reach all the way to her eyes. "You didn't even tell me you landed the deal," she said, not accusing, just observing. "I didn't want to bore you with business stuff," he said casually, brushing it off. But Claire wasn't someone who brushed off easily. "Lucas, I want to know your life." Even the boring parts. He didn't respond right away. The truth was, part of him still operated like he was alone, like everything had to be protected, like letting someone in would somehow weaken the structure. And Claire saw that. She saw the old habit of retreating, the way he didn't always remember. He wasn't surviving anymore. She reached for his hand. "We're not two people orbiting each other. We're building something. Remember?" Lucas nodded, but shame crept in. How could he be this far in and still not know how to share all of himself? But Claire didn't pull away. She stayed. She kept showing up, even on the days when he didn't know how to say what he was feeling. And then came her turn to fall apart. It was a Tuesday in April when Claire's mother collapsed. Stroke. Sudden. No warning. Lucas was at work when the call came. He dropped everything. He didn't ask. He just went. He found Claire in a hospital waiting room, curled up in a chair like a child, her eyes red, hands trembling. The woman who had held him through so much now needed someone to hold her. She didn't cry when he pulled her into his arms. She just sank into him like a ship, finally docking after a storm. "I don't know what I'll do if she doesn't wake up," Claire whispered into his shirt. Lucas didn't say, "She'd be fine," because he knew those words were sometimes lies people told to soothe themselves. He just held her tighter and said, "Then we'll face it together." Claire's mother survived, but the recovery was slow, and it forced Claire to become someone she hadn't been in years, a daughter, a caretaker, a witness to decline. There were days she wouldn't answer texts, nights she'd cancel their plans, and Lucas understood, but it hurt, not because he needed her attention, but because he hated seeing her wear herself thin without letting him help. One night, after she'd finally come home from the hospital and collapsed on the couch, he brought her soup. She didn't speak much, just sat there, exhausted, eyes empty. He placed the bowl in front of her, but she didn't move. "Claire," he said softly, kneeling in front of her, "you don't have to do all of this alone." She blinked, then whispered, "But I do. It's how I've survived." He shook his head gently. "You survived that way, but you don't have to live that way anymore." She finally looked at him, and for a long moment, neither of them spoke. Then she reached out, took his hand, and said something he would never forget. "Then show me how." That night, they didn't make love. They didn't talk about dreams. They didn't plan their future. They just lay on her couch, wrapped in blankets and quiet understanding. And Lucas realized something powerful. Healing isn't a straight line. It's a quiet loop of falling and choosing to rise. Again and again with someone willing to rise with you. They were both imperfect, both scarred, but they had become safe places for each other. And that kind of love, it's not found on apps. It's not scripted in fairy tales. It's built in moments just like that tired nights, between cold soup and shared silence. When two people realize they don't have to be whole to belong, they just have to stay. And Lucas was ready to stay. Asterisk, they say, real love doesn't shout. It whispers in the quiet spaces when no one else is watching. For Lucas, that whisper became a presence in his life he no longer wanted to live without. The following months moved like water, sometimes calm, sometimes rough, always changing. Claire's mother eventually returned home, frailer but still witty, her spirit sharp beneath the wear of illness. Claire, now balancing full-time care and part-time teaching, often looked like she was holding the sky up on her shoulders. Lucas tried to be her anchor, but some days it felt like she wouldn't let him. She would smile, thank him, lean on him, enough to keep from falling but not enough to truly rest. One night, as he watched her asleep on the couch, a blanket barely clinging to her legs, Lucas felt something stir in his chest. Not infatuation, not even desire, it was something deeper. He didn't just love Claire, he respected her, respected the strength it took to show up, the grace in her exhaustion, the way she chose kindness even when life offered none in return. He wanted to spend his life with her, but love, real love, doesn't come without fear, especially when you've both been broken before. When he bought the ring, it was a quiet decision, not grand, not impulsive. He didn't tell Theo. He didn't ask for advice. He simply walked into a small, sunlit shop and chose something delicate and timeless, an oval-cut diamond set in brushed gold. It reminded him of Claire, beautiful, understated, and solid. But the moment he placed it in his drawer, the doubts arrived like echoes from the past. What if she wasn't ready? What if he asked her and she pulled away again? What if loving her wasn't enough? And deeper than all that was one question he couldn't shake. Was he really capable of forever? The fear didn't come from her. It came from inside him, from years of telling himself he wasn't enough, that anyone who got too close would eventually leave. That night, he found himself on the balcony, staring at the city lights below, gripping the velvet box like a secret too loud to hold. He didn't propose the next day, or the one after that. Instead, he poured himself into the lake house, the one he had sketched months ago, the one Claire called your soul on paper. Every weekend, he drove out to the land he had purchased by the cliffs near the Sound, watched the frame rise, beam by beam. It became his therapy, his prayer, his promise to himself. Claire visited once, stood barefoot on the unfinished wood, hair flying in the wind, and said softly, "It already feels like home." But even then, Lucas couldn't find the words. And then, one Thursday evening, everything changed. Claire called. Her voice was tight, her breathing uneven. "Lucas," she said, "I found a lump." Time stopped. The world narrowed into the sound of her voice. "I'm at the doctor now. They're running tests. I didn't want to panic." But her voice broke. "I need you." 2 hours later, Lucas sat beside her on the edge of the hospital bed, holding her hand like it was the only real thing in the room. The nurse came and went. Blood was drawn. Silence stretched. Claire stared at the floor, lips trembling. "I'm scared." Lucas didn't try to fix it, didn't offer false hope. He just pulled her close and whispered, "Whatever it is, I'm not going anywhere." The biopsy results took a week. They lived that week moment by moment, like people holding their breath underwater. Lucas cancelled meetings, turned off his phone, cooked for her, sat with her mother. He became part of her routine, not because he was trying to prove anything, but because that's what love does. It shows up. When the results came back benign, Claire wept for an hour, not from relief, from the fear she had been holding in silence. Lucas held her through it. And later that night, while they sat on the porch, wrapped in blankets and thunder rolled in the distance, he finally said it. "I was going to wait for the perfect moment," he began, "but life doesn't wait, and neither should we." Claire turned, surprised. "What do you mean?" He pulled the box from his pocket. Simple, no music, no audience, just them. "I love you, Claire Thompson." Not because you make life easier, but because you make it real. Because you stay when it's hard. Because you let me stay. He opened the box. I want to build a life with you. Not one without pain, or storms, or sleepless nights, but one where we face them together. Her eyes filled. She didn't answer immediately. She reached for the ring, traced it with her fingers. Then she looked at him and whispered something that hit deeper than any yes ever could. You make me feel safe to be all of me. Then she nodded, tears falling freely. Yes, she said, to everything. Yes to you, yes to us. They didn't go inside right away, just stayed there, thunder cracking above them, the wind wild in their hair, hearts beating loud enough to drown out the storm. And Lucas knew, in that moment, he hadn't just found love, he had found home. Some endings don't feel like endings at all. They feel like the beginning of something finally whole. The wedding wasn't grand. It wasn't a palace or a 5-star resort. It was the lake house, the one Lucas had designed before he ever knew he'd built it for two. By the time the summer sun filtered through the tall trees and laid soft shadows across the polished floors, the house had become more than walls and windows. It had become a story. Their story, written in wood and stone, in effort and waiting. A love letter in architecture. They said their vows with bare feet and tearful eyes. Just a few close friends. Her mother seated proudly in the front row, and Theo with his hands shaking from holding back emotion. No orchestra, no scripted speeches, just real words, spoken with quiet certainty. I promise, Claire said, her voice catching, to walk beside you when the days are long, and run toward you when they're short. Lucas looked at her, tears in his eyes. I promise to never build walls he can't walk through, to stay, even in silence, to begin again, every day, with you. There were no dramatic declarations, no thunderous applause, just the wind moving softly through the trees, like the world was holding its breath in reverence. That night, after the laughter and toasts and candles burned low, they stood on the edge of the cliff, looking out at the water. The sky above them bloomed with stars fierce and quiet. Claire leaned into him. Do you still remember what you were looking for, that New Year's Eve? Lucas wrapped his arms around her, thoughtful. I think I was looking for permission. To what? To feel again, he said. To let someone see me. To stop surviving. Claire smiled, eyes glistening. And now, he whispered, I'm alive. But life doesn't pause after the perfect moment. It moves forward, with all its unpredictable, beautiful chaos. The following year, Claire's mother passed away peacefully. In her sleep, surrounded by her daughter's love and soft piano music playing in the corner. Grief came in waves, some days loud and sharp, other days a silent ache in the middle of laughter. But Lucas didn't let her face it alone. He learned what it meant to hold space, to not fix, but simply be. He cooked her mother's favorite meals, played her favorite jazz records on rainy afternoons, hung photos on the lake house walls ones Claire couldn't bring herself to touch, but was grateful to see every morning. And eventually, joy found its way back, not as loud celebrations, but in slow walks, shared books, burnt pancakes, and sleepy kisses before sunrise. That then came the news they never expected. Claire had always been told children might not be part of her story, something about complications in her early 20s, a quiet heartbreak she had accepted long before Lucas came into her life. But then, one quiet October morning, she stood in the kitchen with trembling hands and 2 pink lines. Lucas found her, sitting on the floor, barefoot, the test in her hand, and tears slipping down her cheeks. I don't know how, she whispered, but it's real. Lucas dropped to his knees beside her, his heart pounding. Then we make room, he said softly. Room in this house, in our lives, in our hearts. 9 months later, their daughter was born during a thunderstorm, just like the night he had proposed. Her name was Alara, a name they'd once read in a book of forgotten stars. She didn't cry at first, just opened her eyes and looked up at them, as if she already knew she had come into a story still unfolding. Lucas held her gently, his voice thick. I never thought I'd have this. Claire, exhausted but glowing, smiled. You built it, brick by brick, just not with concrete. Years passed. The lake house grew louder, warmer, finger paintings on the fridge, tiny shoes by the door. Claire's laughter in the garden, Lucas teaching Alara how to sketch trees in his notebooks. They didn't need a perfect life, they had a real one. Sometimes, strangers would ask Lucas about his success, the awards, the clients. the homes he'd built in glass and steel, and he'd always smile and say, "My greatest design wasn't a building, it was this life." He kept the velvet box in a drawer, not because he needed the ring anymore, but because it reminded him that courage doesn't always roar. Sometimes it's a quiet voice on a stormy night saying, "Stay." And he had, through loneliness, through doubt, through silence, and on the other side, he hadn't just found love, he found a reason to hope again, a reason to live fully, a reason to believe that even after 7 years of loneliness, a single evening-ear blind date, a woman in a red dress could rewrite every chapter that came before. And to this day, when the mist falls over the lake and the wind moves through the trees just right, Lucas sometimes stands at the edge of the cliff, holding Ilara's hand, and whispers to her, "Love didn't save me. It invited me to save myself with someone who never gave up on me." And Ilara, with her mother's eyes and her father's quiet soul, always answers, "That's the kind I want to, Daddy." He smiles, "You will. Just promise me one thing." "What's that?" "When it comes, don't run. Let it stay."